My stepsister used my college fund for her wedding, and my mom helped cover it up until my dad found out. Have you ever trusted someone so much, only to find out they were betraying you behind your back? It's one of those moments where your entire world feels like it's crumbling, and the people you thought you could rely on the most are the ones holding the hammer. That's exactly what happened to me when my mom and stepsister made a choice that not only broke my trust, but also changed the course of my future. My parents divorced when I was pretty young. I was about 8 years old when my dad sat me down and promised me something that, at the time, felt so far away it was almost impossible to imagine. He told me he'd started a college fund just for me. He said, "I want you to have the future you deserve, no matter what happens." Even as a kid, I could see how much it meant to him. He worked long hours, skipping vacations and nights out, just to save up that money for me. That fund wasn't just numbers in a bank account. It was his way of saying, "I've got your back." I grew up knowing that, no matter what, I'd have the chance to go to college without worrying about crippling debt. It was my ticket to freedom, independence, and a better life. Now, here's where things get complicated. After the divorce, my mom remarried. Her new husband came with a daughter of his own, my stepsister. I wish I could say we got along like the sisters you see in movies, but the truth is, we were never close. She was the kind of person who always wanted the spotlight, the fanciest things, the biggest gestures. She liked to live big. At first, I didn't think much of it. I figured, to each their own, right? But looking back now, I see the red flags I ignored. My mom seemed to favor her in ways that were hard to miss. Little things, like how she'd get away with breaking the rules, or how my mom always found a way to justify her behavior. Still, I didn't think it would ever go beyond a little favoritism. I never imagined it would reach a point where it would directly impact me, my future, and my dad's hard-earned money. But then, the betrayal happened. I discovered something so shocking that it felt like my heart had been ripped out of my chest. The people I trusted the most, the people who should have been looking out for me, weren't just hiding the truth. They were actively working against me. And the worst part? I had no idea until it was almost too late. This isn't just a story about stolen money. It's about betrayal, selfishness, and the hard lesson I learned about standing up for myself when no one else would. Buckle up, because this is where the nightmare begins. When my parents divorced, it wasn't easy, but at least it was peaceful, or so I thought. I stayed with my mom, but my dad was always there for me, making sure I felt loved and supported. He wasn't just a weekend dad. He really showed up. One of the most meaningful things he did was start a college fund for me. I remember the day he told me about it. I must have been around 8 or 9, and he said, "This is for your future. I don't want you to ever worry about how you're going to get through college." Even as a kid, I understood how big that was. College felt like a distant dream, but knowing he was planning ahead for me made me feel special, like my future really mattered. He worked hard for it too. Long hours, skipped vacations, no fancy new gadgets for himself, just so that fund could grow. I didn't know the exact amount, but I knew it was a lot, enough to cover tuition and give me a real shot at a better life. But then came the remarriage. My mom met someone new, and along with him came my stepsister. She was about my age but couldn't have been more different. If I'm honest, I tried to like her at first. I really did, but it was hard when everything seemed to revolve around her. She had this way of demanding attention, like the world owed her something. Whether it was the newest phone, designer clothes, or the most extravagant birthday parties, she had to have it all. And she wasn't shy about asking, or should I say, demanding it. At first, I didn't think much of it. My mom has always been the kind of person who wants everyone to be happy, and she tried hard to blend our families together. But the longer I lived with my stepsister, the more I noticed this pattern. My mom wasn't just trying to keep the peace, she was bending over backward for my stepsister. It started small, like letting her pick where we'd go for family dinners, or covering for her when she broke the rules. But over time, it grew into something bigger, something harder to ignore. Then came the talk about the college fund. My dad had been handling it since day one, but at some point, my mom convinced him it would be safer if she managed it. She said things like, "It's just easier this way," and, "Don't worry, I'll make sure everything's fine." I didn't question it at the time. She was my mom, after all. If you can't trust your mom, who can you trust, right? But now, looking back, I see the warning signs I missed. The way she always seemed so quick to defend my stepsister no matter what she did. The way she acted like I was overreacting anytime I pointed out something unfair. And most importantly, the way she started being vague whenever I brought up the college fund. She'd brush it off with comments like, "It's all handled," or "You don't need to worry about that right now." I didn't know it then, but that was just the beginning of something much bigger. Something that would shake the foundation of my family and my trust in the people I thought I could rely on the most. When my stepsister announced she was getting married, it was like the entire world had to stop and revolve around her. I'll admit, the initial announcement wasn't a huge surprise. She'd been dating her fiancé for a while, and she was the kind of person who always wanted the fairy tale ending, the big show-stopping moment that everyone would talk about. But what really caught me off guard was just how extravagant her plans were. From the very first conversation about it, she wasn't talking about just any wedding. She was talking about the wedding of the year. She wanted a grand ballroom in some historic estate, floral arrangements that looked like they belonged in a royal garden, and a custom-made designer dress that probably cost more than most people's cars. Every little detail had to be the best of the best, from a live string quartet to imported champagne. She talked about it like it was going to be a scene out of a Hollywood movie. And my mom? Oh, she was ecstatic. If you had walked into our house back then, you'd think she was the one getting married. She was buzzing with excitement, constantly talking about colors, themes, guest lists, and catering options. She'd say things like, "This has to be perfect. It's a once-in-a-lifetime event." It was like she had taken on the role of head wedding planner, and trust me, she was taking it seriously. At first, I didn't think much of it. I mean, weddings are a big deal, and my mom had always been a little over the top about special occasions. But the more I watched her, the more something felt off. She wasn't just excited, she was invested. Too invested. It was almost like she had a personal stake in making sure this wedding was as extravagant as possible. What really started raising red flags was how much my mom was willing to bend over backward to make my stepsister happy. Anytime my stepsister had some wild idea, my mom was right there saying, "Of course, sweetheart, we'll make it happen." Even when things started sounding ridiculously expensive, like the idea of having a destination bachelorette party or custom calligraphy on every single invitation, my mom didn't blink. She just kept saying, "We'll figure it out, don't worry." That phrase, "we'll figure it out," started sticking in my head, because figuring it out sounded a lot like finding money. And I couldn't help but wonder where all this money was coming from. My mom had always been cautious about spending before, but now it was like she'd thrown all that out the window. She acted like there was an endless bank account to pull from, and I started to feel uneasy. The strangest part was how she tried to keep me out of the loop. Normally, my mom would share everything with me. She'd love to chat about plans or gossip about family drama. But when it came to the wedding, she seemed secretive. If I asked too many questions about the budget or how they were paying for all these big ideas, she'd quickly change the subject or brush me off with, "Oh, it's all handled." It was weird, but I didn't push it too hard. After all, this was my stepsister's big moment, and I didn't want to seem like I was being negative or nosy. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more going on beneath the surface. And as much as I wanted to ignore it, those red flags just kept piling up. I started noticing little things that didn't sit right with me long before the truth came out. My mom would always reassure me about my college fund anytime I brought it up, but recently, her answers started to feel vague. If I asked how much was in the account, or if she'd been keeping up with it, she'd brush me off with something like, "Oh, it's all there, don't worry about it." But her tone wasn't convincing. It was rushed, like she wanted to change the subject as quickly as possible. At first, I told myself I was imagining things. I mean, why wouldn't I trust her? This was my mom, the person who was supposed to have my back, no matter what. But the more I thought about it, the more uneasy I felt. Every time the topic of the fund came up, she either dodged the question or gave me a canned response. It wasn't like her. I started to wonder if there was something she wasn't telling me. The breaking point came out of nowhere. One evening, I was walking through the house when I heard my mom on the phone. Her voice was low, but I caught bits and pieces of what she was saying. She was talking about the wedding, going over some last-minute payments, and then she said something that made my stomach drop. She said, "It's fine, the money's already covered. The fund was more than enough." I froze. The fund? What fund? My gut told me exactly what she meant, but I didn't want to believe it. My heart started pounding, and I tried to convince myself I had misunderstood. But then, a few days later, I found the proof I couldn't ignore. I was helping my mom clean out some papers in her room, a rare moment of bonding, or so I thought. when I came across a folder with bank statements. Normally I wouldn't have looked twice, but something made me pause. The folder had my name on it. My name. When I opened it, my worst fears were confirmed. The statements showed that my college fund had been completely drained. Every dollar, gone. I scanned the transactions and it all added up. Florists, caterers, venue deposits, dress fittings. My college fund wasn't just touched, it had been gutted, piece by piece, to pay for my stepsister's wedding. I remember just sitting there staring at the papers, feeling like the ground had been pulled out from under me. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. My hands were shaking and tears started streaming down my face before I even realized I was crying. The betrayal hit me like a truck. This wasn't just money. This was my future. My dad had worked so hard to save for me, to make sure I had opportunities he never did. And it was all gone in the blink of an eye. And my mom? The person I trusted most in the world? She had helped make it happen. She hadn't just allowed it, she'd planned it, lied about it, and tried to hide it from me. It felt like someone had ripped my heart out. All I could think was, how could she do this to me? The anger came next. A hot, searing rage that made me feel like I was going to explode. I wanted to scream, to throw the papers in her face and demand answers, but I also felt so powerless. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to confront her right then and there, but another part of me was too hurt to even form words. I put the folder back where I found it, pretending like I hadn't seen anything, but inside, I was a mess. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind was racing, replaying every conversation, every moment where I had trusted her, and it all felt like a lie. I kept asking myself, what do I do now? But one thing was clear, I couldn't keep this to myself. My dad deserved to know the truth. I couldn't hold it in any longer. The next day, I decided to confront my mom. My hands were trembling as I stood in front of her, the words tumbling out before I could even think. Why is my college fund empty? I asked, my voice shaking with a mix of anger and hurt. Her face changed immediately. For a split second, she looked caught, like a deer in headlights, but then she quickly tried to compose herself. Honey, calm down, she said, waving her hand as if it wasn't a big deal. It's not what you think. But I wasn't backing down. Not what I think? Then tell me, Mom. How does my college fund end up paying for her wedding? I could barely keep my voice steady. She sighed, almost like she was annoyed at me for even asking. It's for family, she said, as if that explained everything. Your stepsister needed it, and we didn't have enough money to give her the wedding she deserved. You'll understand someday when you're older. Understand? That was the last thing I wanted to hear. So you just decided my education wasn't important? That I didn't matter? My words came out louder than I intended, but I couldn't help it. She didn't flinch, didn't even seem sorry. Instead, she gave me this look like I was the one being unreasonable. You're young, she said. You'll have time to figure things out. But a wedding? That's a once-in-a-lifetime event. It's not like we could just postpone it. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She was actually trying to make me feel bad for questioning her. You stole my future for her party, I snapped. How do you not see how wrong that is? And then, as if things couldn't get worse, my stepsister walked into the room. She must have heard us arguing because she had this smug, unapologetic look on her face. Oh, stop being so dramatic, she said, rolling her eyes. It's not like you were using the money right now anyway. I turned to her, completely stunned. Are you serious? That money was for my education. How can you not feel bad about this? She shrugged, like it was no big deal. I needed it more than you, she said, her tone dripping with entitlement. A wedding is a milestone. You'll have other chances to go to college, but I couldn't wait for my big day. Her words hit me like a slap. She wasn't just unremorseful. She actually believed she deserved it more than I did. My mom stood there, silent, not even trying to defend me. It was like they'd teamed up to gaslight me into thinking I was overreacting. I felt my chest tighten as the betrayal sank even deeper. My own family had not only stolen from me, but was trying to make me feel guilty for calling them out. At that moment, I knew there was no reasoning with either of them. They didn't see me as a priority. They never had. After that disaster of a confrontation, I knew I couldn't handle this alone. My mom and stepsister had already made it clear where their loyalties lay, and it wasn't with me. There was only one person left I could trust. My dad. He had worked so hard to save that college fund, and I knew he deserved to know the truth. Calling him wasn't easy. My dad and I always had a strong bond, but I hated being the one to bring him this kind of news. Still, I dialed his number, my heart pounding in my chest. When he picked up, his voice was calm, like always, and for a moment I hesitated. How do you tell someone that their trust has been completely betrayed? "Dad," I finally said, my voice shaking, "we need to talk. It's about my college fund." He went silent for a moment, and I could tell he already suspected something was wrong. "What happened?" he asked, his tone more serious now. I told him everything. Every detail about how my fund had been drained, how Mom had justified it as being for family, and how my stepsister didn't even feel bad about it. I expected him to be shocked, but what I didn't expect was the sheer anger in his voice when he finally spoke. "She did what?" He practically growled. "Your mom had no right to touch that money. That was for you for your future." I could hear him pacing on the other end of the line, his frustration bubbling over. "Don't worry," he said firmly. "I'll handle this. She's not getting away with this." And when my dad says he's going to handle something, he means it. That same evening, he showed up at my mom's house unannounced. I wasn't there to see it, but I can only imagine the scene. According to him, the moment he walked through the door, he went straight to my mom and demanded answers. "Where's the money?" he asked, his voice sharp and unwavering. My mom, caught off guard, tried to give him the same excuses she'd given me, that it was for family, that my stepsister needed it more, that I'd understand someday. But my dad wasn't having any of it. "That money wasn't yours to touch," he said, cutting her off. "It was for our daughter's education. You had no right to take it, and I want to know exactly how much is left." At that point, my mom started to get defensive. She tried to turn it around on him, accusing him of not understanding the importance of the wedding and saying things like, "I was just trying to do what's best for the family." But my dad wasn't buying it. He demanded to see the bank statements, and when she finally handed them over, his worst fears were confirmed. The account was almost completely drained. There were only a few $100s left, a pitiful fraction of what had been saved. The fallout was immediate. My dad was furious, and he didn't hold back. He told my mom that she had betrayed not only me, but also him, and that there would be consequences. He promised to take legal action if necessary, to make sure this kind of thing never happened again. As for my stepsister, she apparently tried to defend herself too, saying things like, "It was for my special day," and "You don't understand how much weddings cost." But my dad shut her down quickly. "Your special day doesn't justify stealing from my daughter," he said, his voice ice cold. The tension between my parents was unbearable after that. My dad made it clear that he would no longer trust my mom with anything involving money. Their relationship, already strained from the divorce, was now completely fractured. And me? I felt a mix of relief and sadness. Relief that my dad had my back and wasn't going to let this slide, but sadness because this whole situation had torn my family apart even more. It was like a wound that wouldn't heal, and I couldn't help but feel like I was stuck in the middle of it all. So, the wedding went ahead, despite everything that happened. My stepsister got her big day, one she clearly thought would be the happiest of her life. But honestly, it was hard to enjoy. It was like I was watching a celebration that had nothing to do with me anymore. The cracks in my relationship with my mom and stepsister were now permanent, and no amount of flowers or fancy cake could cover that up. I didn't feel part of their family anymore. The love I thought was there had evaporated. But my dad, he stood by me through it all. After everything had settled, he made sure I had the support I needed to keep moving forward with my education. We managed to find a way to make up for the lost money. He helped me get a loan, and I applied for scholarships like my life depended on it. It wasn't easy, but I refused to let this setback define my future. I wasn't going to let them steal my dreams along with my college fund. Looking back, though, there are so many lessons I had to learn the hard way. First of all, trust is a fragile thing. You can trust people your whole life, and yet in one moment they can shatter that trust in a way you never thought possible. My mom and stepsister's betrayal hit harder than anything I could have imagined. And I never would have guessed that it would come from the people I'd always thought would have my back. But here's the thing. As much as it hurt, I learned to rely on myself. No one could take away my future except me. I had to stand up for what I deserved, even when it meant confronting the people closest to me. It wasn't easy. In fact, it was one of the toughest things I've ever had to do. But I came out stronger, more determined than ever to succeed. And to anyone out there going through something similar, just know this. Sometimes, the people you trust the most can hurt you the deepest. But those moments teach you something invaluable. They teach you how to rely on yourself and find strength in places you never thought you'd need to. You don't always have control over what happens to you, but you do have control over how you respond. And when you take that power back, you realize just how strong you really are. So even though my family's relationship will never be the same, I'm at peace with the fact that I can still build my future on my own terms. That's the silver lining in all of this. And if I can get through this, so can you. Just remember, you're capable of more than you think.